Everybody. Um, it's time for us to continue to move forward with our application. The state we left it in last time is we had just deployed it to Heroku, and hopefully you were all successful with that. We're going to step back away from Heroku and Postgres back into the SQLite development part of our app as we learn how to set up a registration endpoint. And so in order to set up a registration endpoint, we need to add a table to our project. Right now our tables are messages and lessons. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a users table. So in order to add a users table, we need to run another migration. So hopefully you have installed Connects globally. If not, you just have to enter npx in front of your connects commands. I have installed connects globally using the -g flag. So to install connects globally, just again, for those of you who haven't, you would do npm or yarn install connects with the -g, like npm I connects with the -g flag like that, and that'll install it globally. But I've already done that, so I'm not going to do that. So what I'm going to do is create a users table by running a migration make. If you recall, we did that way back when we created our tables. So I'm going to run a connects migrate make. And if you recall, if you make a table, you got to give a name. So I'm going to say create users table. And I'm going to hit enter. And that should create. So now our earlier files are still recorded in the lessons table, but look at now we have a new migration added with a later timestamp. This long crazy number is a timestamp number used internally, so it runs your migrations in the proper order. As you can imagine, like a lot of way more complicated projects than this little thing that we're working on here, they might have all kinds of tables, and the tables need to be added in a very specific order. If you recall me saying you always have to add parent tables before you add child tables. So tables that have one-to-many relationships, well, the table that's the one needs to always be added for the tables that you add that connect to them that have the many. But anyway, we're just going to create a real simple user table with just an ID, username, and password. So let's go into this file that we just created, connects migrate make, and you gave it a name. Let's go into this file and see we have our nice vanilla brand new file here for us to define our tables. And so what we're going to do is, you know what, I'm going to go just to the top part of here and just copy this top part and copy this. I'll just copy the whole, well, let me see, I'll just copy the top part. Control C, just so I don't make a mistake here, and let's just paste that in there. And let me close this down over here, and let's give us a lot more room over here. So we're going to close that, and there we go. So we're going to create our tables. This creates a table for us we're going to call it users. And so we're going to add an increments field, table dot increments. If you recall, this is a ID field that's auto incrementing. So we're going to add that, and then we're going to add a text field with username, and let's put a constraint. Maybe the username can be no more than 128 characters. And let's also add a constraint on it. Let's chain on a not nullable And let's chain on a unique, because we don't want usernames to exist in the table more than once. Let's chain on that. And finally, let's chain on index, which will allow the database to index that field for faster lookups. When a database adds an index, it adds an internal mechanism whereby it allows you to do a search on that field way faster. It'll index that field. And so we're going to add that. Let's add then one other field called, which is also a text field called, not password, password. And although maybe we should call it password, I don't know. And then let's say the password can be no longer than 255. And this also cannot be not nullable. You cannot leave it blank. And I think, I'm missing a brace there. There we go. And that looks good. We have an ID field, a username, and a password. Now let's finish our the bottom part. Return connects.schema.drop table if exists users. Let's save that. And so now we've just to highlight what we've done is we ran a connects migrate make, which created this shell file for us. And now we've filled in this file with the table users with an ID field, a username, and a password field. We've said the username cannot be blank. It has to be a unique value. And let's index it for faster lookups. And then we've added a field for a password that also cannot be blank. And so we've added that. Now let's actually create the table by running connects migrate. You know what, let's see if I can get this all on the screen at once. So my text editor. Let's see, it's connects migrate latest. And that should create the actual table. And let's hit enter. Excellent. It ran the migration. We'll trust that it was built, but if you wanted to confirm it, you could go to SQLite Studio and you could look it up and make sure that you do a database, like refresh all database schemas. That'll refresh the file and then you could look it up. But it shows here, look at, I have a users field with an ID, username, and password with username, index, and unique. So let's go back to code. So now we have a user table built and it's blank. And so now we need to do a couple things that we've done in past videos. We need to set up routes to it so we can add records and do lookups. We need to add to our DB helpers file the actual queries that we're going to use. And then we need to write our endpoints in the routes. Probably the easiest right now for us would be just to write the database helpers. So let's write the database helpers real quick. So our database helpers here were remove message finalists. So we're going to add a couple. Let's add like 3. Let's create add user. Let's create an add user function. Let's create a find all users function, and then maybe a find user by username. We'll write these 3 real quick here. So let's write this one first so we can add records and then we'll be able to look it up and verify. So let's write this add user one first. Since this is an insert, it's an async. All insert, you need to use async await or it won't work. Async, and then I'm going to say function add user. It's named the same thing as you name it up here. And we're going to include an object with the user information in there. Let's just shell out all three of our functions. And then we're going to say function find all users. We're not going to pass any information into that. That's just a simple get. And then we're going to do function find user by username. And we're going to pass in username so we can look it up. All right, let's write these three real quick. This is going to be easy. You've done this before, so I know you guys are good at this. But practice always helps you know it more, right? So we're going to return. We're going to do this so that if you wanted to go and push this up to Postgres, remember, if you wanted to push this up to Postgres, you would have to run your migrations again in the Postgres, in the Heroku command line. Remember, you'd have to run Heroku migrate latest in order to actually create the tables in Postgres. But we're not going to do that. We're just going to keep this in SQLite here on our local machine. So return await, since it is an insert operations. So anytime you use async, then await. DB users. That's what we named our table, right? Users right there. Users. So, and we're going to do an insert of this user object right here, of a user, and we're going to return back. Remember, Postgres needs these things returned in a very specific way, so we'll return back the ID and the username. And that's it for an add user. Let's write this find all users. This should be really easy. Return DB users. And that's it for that one. It'll return all users in the table. And so now let's do this final one where we're passing in the username. And then this would be return DB users. And so what do we want return? We want to return where the username equals the one passed in. So where, and since we named our variable the same name as the actual field name, then we can use this nice JavaScript shorthand where we just say where username. You know, the long way would be where username equals username. It's passed in, but since they're the same, you can use this quick shorthand. Username dot first, and it'll find the first record it comes across and it'll return that record. And so there, our database helpers have been written. And so now let's we'll close this. We'll close this. So right now we have lesson routes and message routes. Let's set up a route for users. So to keep in line with if you know, we have a server that's set up here and all the different routes are in separate files, which makes them easier to maintain and to manage and to reason about. So we're going to create a const users router equals require, and then we're going to make that file, which will be routes, and it's going to be called users routes. It's not built yet. We have to go build it, but that's what it's going to be called. And anything that you require, now you use down here. This is how we then use it. Server.use. And so how do we want, let me see, we should have it /API/users probably. Yeah. And then what do we want? It's the users router. I'll copy that. Paste that right here. So all of our user routes are going to be, for right now, since we're in development, it's going to be localhost 5000 /API/users / anything else that we define in our router file. So let's save this file. And then now let's go create our route for we're going to call it user routes. Let's copy that and come over here and create a new file in our routes folder called, let's paste that on, userroutes.js. And let's go to one of the other routes and go up to the top because we need all this stuff up top, same as those ones. Control C. So we're going to need Express setup. We're going to need access to our helpers file that we just wrote. And then we need to set up a router. And so now we need to write our first endpoint. And let's see. Let's make it router dot post. Let's add a record first because we don't have any records in there. So let's create our post endpoint first. We'll call it router.post /register. Let's create a register endpoint where you're adding a user. And so these are, let me just make a comment here, for all endpoints beginning with /API/users, and then this will be then /register after that, right? So then we're going to say pass in our homies, rec and res. And now the credentials, username and password, we're going to get off the rec.body. So we're going to say const credentials, that's a good variable name, equals rec.body. All right. So now before we try to call our database helper to add the record, we need to make sure that the person enters both a username and a password, right? Because they are required. And so what if the JSON is only passing the username and they forget to enter the password, or one or the other? Let's write our logic so that before we try to insert the record, we make sure that the record has both required fields that we're looking for. And so we can do that by saying, well, let's first deconstruct the username and the password off of the credentials file, and I'll show you why. So let's first go const username and password equals credential. Let's make this credentials plural. Credentials. And so now that we have these in their own variables, this basically, when you deconstruct, for those of you that are unfamiliar with deconstruction, is you can take an object and you can pull the fields out of the object and make them their own variables of their own right by this deconstruction method. So right now, credentials contains an object with these two values in there. And so this will pull them out and make them their own field names. And so now that we have them as their own field names, we can run a nice simple little JavaScript if statement. We could say something like if not username and password. So if one of these is blank, then we want to know. If not username and password, then let's just return a res.status of, like, I think 400. 400 is like missing information. 400.json with a message of username, and let's just close our terminal for right now. Username and password required. All right. So now we basically, if we're just doing a little check before we try to insert a record to make sure both of these fields have been input by the user. All right, so then now we could probably try to enter the password. Let's say now we can do our familiar lessons dot, what do we call it? We call it add user, right? We called it add user. Lessons.add user. So lessons.add user, and we're going to pass into this credentials, this object now. And then we can do our dot then user, and then we can do a res.status of 200 if it goes in with a returning JSON with the user object. And then anytime you do a dot then, you should have a dot catch error, and in the error, see, so now if trying to add the user, what if the username, what if there is both a username and a password, but you're trying to add a username that's already taken? Well, the database won't let you add it because we, in our file here, we said unique. So the database won't add it. But if you, so you would try to add it, and it won't add it, so it won't fulfill this part of the code because it'll say nope. It's going to jump down to the catch and it's going to give you an error, but the error message is going to give you a predictable error message if it can't add it. It's called a constraint. It's a constraint violation because we put a constraint on this field that it couldn't be left blank, and it has to be unique. So a constraint, what we can do is we can check in this error object for the constraint value, which is a return value of 19. So we can look in this error object, so we can give, instead of giving our standard res.status 500 message, unable to add record, well, why were you unable to add the record? Is it because you tried to add one where the username was already taken? We can, in other words, return a message that's a little bit more helpful to the developer as to why adding the record failed. And so what we can do is we can say if error dot error number, and what you can do is you can console log just error, and then you'll see it's an object, and then this is a key value pair that's on that object. So if error dot error number equals 19, that's the constraint violation error number, I happen to know. So if it does equal that, then you know you can return a res.status of 400 because 400 is due to input error of some type. So we can say .json, .json with a message, crazy fingers today, message of username already taken, because that's a constraint violation. If you're getting an error of 19, it means that you're trying to add a record that already exists. So, or then after that we can do an else here, else then our familiar res.status of 500 dot JSON. We can just return the error code in the JSON. This is an object, and it'll make it a JSON. So hopefully that is kind of explainable. We can add that. So let's save. All right, let's spin up our server and see if we can add a record. So let me get my terminal open here and get my server going. Yarn serve. Router. Oh, didn't do a module.exports. So in our router file, we have to module.exports equals router. Save on that. And there we go. Now our server's running. We had to do that because our server file is trying to import it right here. And in order to import it, we needed to export it. So great. We got our server running on 500. We have written our register route. And we've written our database helpers. So let's go to Insomnia and let's write a register. It's a post. So create a new thing in Insomnia. It's a post, and it's the localhost 500/API/users, and then what did we say? Register, right? We said /register. And let's create a JSON object here. And let's, our fields are, remember, we don't have to add the increments field. That's automatically added. And these have to be double quotes. Earlier I was testing and I was using single quotes and I kept getting errors and I'm like, what's going on? And then I forgot. JSONs always need double quotes. So username, how about Alice? And then password, that's the second field name. And let's just add a password of 1234 PASS. Oh, see, I did the single quotes again. It's got to be double quotes. There we go. So let's hit send. Our server's running, right? Our server's running. Yep, our server's running. Everything is saved. Yep. All right, let's hit send. And bingo, it added a record. Good to go. Let's write our find endpoint so we can do a find on this and get our information back. So we have a register endpoint written. Now let's go write our next endpoint. Router.get, because it's just a get, we're retrieving information. And let's write it to let's just leave it to the basic, we're going to get all users first. So we'll do that. Get rec and res. And then lessons dot, and what do we call our find all users? Find all users. This is what we called it right here. I'll copy that. Lessons dot find all users, and that's not passed any information. We're not passing anything on the rec.body or the params. We're just getting information. So dot then users this name here, I don't know if I was explicit before. This name can be, this is a banana word name. You can make it anything you want. It's just helpful to make it something when the database runs this query, whatever this query returns, right here, whatever it returns, it's going to return it back into whatever you name this variable. So the object that gets returned gets named into whatever you want to call it here. So then users, and then let's say res.status of 200. I mean, if it works, it works. It gives you all the users. .json with the users all back. And if it doesn't work, we have a .catch error. And then we can say res.status of 500. For some reason it couldn't return all the users. .json with a message of unable to retrieve users. All right, let's shrink this down. Let's save that. And now let's go do a get to that same endpoint. Let's do a get to the users endpoint and see what we get. Find all users. So I have a find all users that I wrote here. It's basically localhost 500/API/users. And let's do a get. And there's our record. Now, one thing I want to point out to you that is horrible programming practice that we've just done is we stored the password, the user's password, exactly as they entered it. We stored it right in our database. And this is horrible because if our database were to get hacked, then whoever hacked it has access to all of our users' passwords, and they could do a lot of damage. And so in the next video, I'm going to show you how we encrypt this password. So the user enters this, but then we encrypt it and then store a big old long encryption string instead. And the encryption string is like nearly impossible to reverse engineer easily. And that's what we store. And so in the next video, I'm going to be showing you. So for right now, what I've shown you today, please don't go run off and do a project and then store your passwords exactly as the user enters them. We're going to fix this in the very next video. Okay, let's write our last endpoint, our get by username. So router.get, and we're going to make this to the, and since, let's pass the username on the URL parameter. So let's call it :username. And let's say rec and res, our homies. And let's, we're going to pass this in on the rec.params on the URL parameter. So let's deconstruct that. Const username equals rec.params. All right, now that we have that, let's do our lessons dot, what do we call it? Find users by username. Let's copy that. Paste that in there, and we're going to pass in this username. And then we're going to have a dot then user. I'll call it user. And then res.status of 200, .json of the user information back, and with the .catch error the res.status of 500, .json of you can just pass the error in here, json.error, then the error code will go in there. And let's save this. And now go check out that last endpoint. So we have, let's go register another user. Let's go register Greg. We'll leave him with the same password. So we have now another record, 2 records. And if I find all users, I should get 2 records back. So now let's go find Greg right here. Find user by username. So it's a get, and we're passing on the username in the URL. So the user that we're looking for is Greg. And let's hit send. Oh, user aim. So I didn't have the, I have something misspelled in our code. user aim, user aim right here, user aim, user n, username. Let's save that. Let's go back to Insomnia, and now let's try to look for Greg, and there's his information. So very good. We've been able to register a user and to add them and write a couple more endpoints and add another route. In the next video, I am going to show you how to use a cool library called bcrypt.js to encrypt our passwords so that we do not store our password in the database like right now. If you can believe it, there are big companies that still store users' passwords raw, just exactly as they are in their backend database, which is absolutely horrible practice. So hope you stick around for the next video when I show you how to use that. I'm going to be showing you how to how to encrypt a password, and then we're going to write a login endpoint where I show you how the user, they log in with the password that they know, and then the encryption package bcrypt will reverse engineer it to find out what the stored password that we have in our table is. And so it's pretty cool library, and I look forward to showing that to you.